The engagement banquet ended with applause. My life ended with silence. I stood at the entrance of the hotel ballroom while guests filed past me with awkward smiles and lowered eyes. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, turning the entire lobby into a field of shattered stars. At the center of it all stood my fiancée, Lin Yue, the woman I had spent 7 years loving. The woman who had just announced in front of nearly 300 guests that she needed to reconsider our future, not privately, not respectfully, publicly, like a press conference, like I was a problem she was distancing herself from. My fingers were still wrapped around the velvet ring box. The ring inside had cost me 2 years of savings. The humiliation had cost far more. I think everyone deserves honesty, Yue said calmly into the microphone. The room had gone completely quiet. Her voice remained steady. Mine had disappeared. Recently, I've realized that our relationship isn't what I thought it was. A murmur spread through the crowd. I stared at her, waiting, praying, expecting her to stop. She didn't. I've been carrying responsibilities alone for years. The words hit harder than a slap, because they weren't true, not even close. But truth didn't matter once an audience chose a side. People exchanged glances. Several nodded sympathetically toward her, not me. I felt my stomach twist. 7 years. 7 years of driving across the city at midnight because she was upset. 7 years of apologizing first. 7 years of fixing every fight. 7 years of chasing every argument she walked away from. And now I was being presented as the burden, the selfish one, the inadequate fiancé. Someone near the front whispered loudly enough for me to hear. Poor girl. Another voice answered. She's brave for saying it publicly. Brave. The word nearly made me laugh. Instead, I stood frozen. Yue finally looked at me. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation. Regret. Anything. But her expression hardened. We need time apart. The microphone amplified every syllable. The audience applauded politely. The sound echoed through my skull. I don't remember dropping the ring box. I only remember the metallic clink as it hit the floor. Nobody bent down to pick it up. Not even her. 3 hours later, rain hammered against my windshield. The city lights blurred through the water. My phone vibrated again. And again. And again. I glanced at the screen. 36 unread messages. Every one from me. Every one unanswered. I laughed bitterly. Even after what happened, I was still trying. Still explaining. Still chasing. Still searching for a way to repair something she had shattered publicly. Pathetic. The realization made my chest hurt more than the humiliation itself. The traffic light turned red. My car rolled to a stop. I stared at my reflection in the glass. 32 years old. Exhausted. Empty. A man who had spent so much time holding a relationship together that he'd forgotten how to stand by himself. The phone buzzed. This time it was a message. Not from Yue. From her best friend, Su Yan. The preview appeared on the screen. Stop bothering her. She needs space. A second message arrived. If you actually loved her, you'd leave her alone for once. I read the words twice. Then 3 times. Something inside me cracked. Leave her alone? For once? For 7 years, I had been the one refusing to leave. Because every argument ended the same way. Yue would disappear. I would follow. Yue would ignore me. I would apologize. Yue would withdraw. I would fix it. Again. And again. And again. A relationship built on pursuit eventually teaches one person to run and the other to chase. I had never noticed how humiliating that was. The light turned green. Cars behind me honked. I drove forward mechanically. Rain struck the windshield harder. The city blurred. My thoughts blurred with it. Then my phone rang. Yue. My heart reacted before my brain. I answered instantly. Yue, where are you? Her tone was cold. No apology. No concern. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Just irritation. I'm driving. You ignore my messages. I nearly laughed. The irony was almost beautiful. I was driving. Well, come to Riverside Bar. What? My friends are here. I tightened my grip on the wheel. So, silence. The pause seemed to confuse her. For years my answer would have been immediate. Of course. I'll come. What happened? Are you okay? Instead, she heard hesitation. For perhaps the first time. My car broke down, she said. I blinked. What? I need a ride. The words came out as if they were self-evident. As if this conversation should already be over. As if my humiliation 3 hours ago had never happened. As if she hadn't detonated our engagement in front of everyone we knew. I stared through the rain. Then I asked quietly, "Did you call a taxi?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No." "What?" "You can come." "Not can you." "Not please." Just certainty. Expectation. Entitlement. Something ugly stirred inside me. I suddenly remembered every birthday dinner interrupted by her moods. Every work meeting abandoned because she wanted comfort. Every family gathering where I left early because she was upset with someone. Every argument I had begged to resolve. Every time I had sacrificed peace to preserve harmony. And for what? For this. For a woman who publicly humiliated me and still expected immediate service afterward. The realization left me strangely calm. No. The words slipped out naturally. Like a door closing. Silence exploded across the line. What did you say? No. The rain continued drumming against the windshield. My pulse slowed. For the first time in years, I wasn't negotiating. Wasn't explaining. Wasn't pleading. Just answering. No. Zhao Chun. Her voice sharpened. Don't be childish. Childish. The man who spent 7 years cleaning up emotional disasters was being called childish. I almost admired the audacity. You have friends there. That's not the point. Of course it wasn't. The point was that I was supposed to come. I was always supposed to come. No matter what happened. No matter how she behaved. No matter how much it hurt. I closed my eyes briefly. Then opened them again. I'm going home. The line went dead. The next morning felt worse. Not because of the breakup. Because of habit. My hand reached automatically toward my phone. No message. No call. The silence felt unfamiliar. Then I realized something. Most mornings had always begun with me reaching out first. Good morning. Did you sleep well? Are you still upset? Can we talk? The routine was so deeply ingrained that my body performed it automatically. Like a reflex. Like an addiction. I put the phone down. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet. Outside, sunlight filtered through gray clouds. Inside, memories occupied every corner. The coffee mug she'd picked. The blanket she'd chosen. The books she'd never read but insisted matched the furniture. 7 years left traces everywhere. I walked into the kitchen. Opened the refrigerator. Closed it again. No appetite. My phone buzzed. For one ridiculous second, hope surfaced. It wasn't Yue. It was my mother. I answered. Mom, are you okay? No greeting. No preamble. Just concern. Real concern. The kind I'd spent years chasing elsewhere. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I'm fine. A lie. Mothers always know. She sighed softly. You don't sound fine. I sat down slowly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she said something that stunned me. I never liked the way she treated you. I stared at the table. My mother had never interfered. Never criticized Yue. Never created conflict. Yet now her honesty arrived with surgical precision. Why didn't you say anything? I did. I frowned. No. She laughed sadly. I did, Chun. Memories surfaced. Small comments. Questions. Observations. Warnings disguised as casual conversation. I'd ignored them all. Because love is often deaf when truth becomes inconvenient. You always defended her. I lowered my gaze. She wasn't wrong. Come home tonight, Mom said gently. Okay. After hanging up, I remained motionless. The apartment felt different now. Not emptier. Clearer. As if a fog I hadn't noticed was finally lifting. Then my phone vibrated again. This time it was Yue. A single message. You embarrassed me last night. I read it twice. Then a third time. The absurdity stole my breath. Not. I'm sorry. Not. Can we talk? Not. Are you okay? Instead. You embarrassed me. I looked at the screen. For years that message would have triggered panic. Fear. Urgency. A desperate need to repair things. Now it triggered something else. Exhaustion. Pure exhaustion. I placed the phone face down. And for the first time in 7 years. I didn't reply. That night, I never saw the truck. Only the headlights. Blinding white. A horn. Screaming brakes. Impact. Then darkness. Pain exploded through my body. Metal twisted around me. Glass shattered. People shouted somewhere far away. The world tilted. Blood filled my mouth. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The sounds faded gradually, like a radio losing signal. Strangely, my final thoughts weren't about death. They were about silence. About all the arguments I'd chased. All the apologies I'd offered. All the emotional fires I'd extinguished. And the terrible realization that none of it had been enough. Never enough. My phone lay broken nearby. Its screen flickered. One unread message. From Yue. The words appeared through cracked glass. If you want to fix this, come find me tomorrow. Tomorrow. I almost laughed. There wouldn't be a tomorrow. Not for me. As darkness swallowed everything, a final regret surfaced. I had spent my entire life teaching someone that I would always come back, no matter how badly they treated me, no matter how much I lost. And in the end, I lost myself. Darkness consumed the road, consumed the pain, consumed the world. And then, someone slapped a document onto a conference table. The sound echoed sharply. My eyes snapped open. Voices filled the room. Air conditioning hummed overhead. Coffee smelled fresh. I froze. Because I recognized the room. I recognized the building. I recognized the meeting. Impossible. My pulse exploded. Slowly I looked around. Familiar faces. Familiar suits. Familiar expressions. A meeting from years ago. A meeting that had happened long before the engagement disaster. Long before the accident. Long before everything collapsed. My hands trembled. I looked down. Young. Unscarred. Alive. The date displayed on the conference screen. 5 years earlier. The world seemed to stop breathing. And so did I. For several seconds, I couldn't hear anything. The conference room existed in front of me, but my mind was still trapped inside twisted metal and broken glass. I was dead. I remembered the impact. I remembered the blood. I remembered the darkness. Yet somehow, I was sitting in a meeting room at Tiana Technology 5 years before my death. Manager Zhao. A voice pulled me back. I looked up. Wang Jun, one of the project supervisors, was staring at me. Are you feeling unwell? Several people around the table turned toward me. I swallowed hard. No. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Younger. Stronger. Alive. The conference continued, but I barely heard a word. Every few seconds my eyes drifted toward the date displayed on the presentation screen. May 14th. 5 years earlier. 5 years before the engagement banquet. 5 years before the accident. 5 years before everything fell apart. A rebirth. A second chance. If someone had told me such things were possible, I would have laughed in their face. Now I was living it. The meeting ended. People stood and began collecting their documents. I remained seated, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to understand. Memories from both lives crashed together inside my head. The first life, the humiliations, the endless arguments, the apologies, the exhaustion, the engagement disaster, the accident, and then this, a chance to do it all again. No, not again. Differently. The realization sent a chill down my spine, because suddenly I remembered exactly what day this was. Not just the meeting. What came afterward? My phone. I grabbed it immediately. The old model appeared in my hand. The screen lit up. 5 missed calls. All from Lin Yue. My chest tightened. The memory surfaced instantly. This had been one of the first major conflicts of our relationship. Back then she had demanded that I leave an important client meeting halfway through because she was angry. Not hurt. Not sick. Not in danger. Angry. Because I had forgotten to reply to her messages for 2 hours. In my first life, I had abandoned the meeting. My boss had nearly fired me. The client relationship suffered. Anyway, she stayed angry anyway. For 3 more days. I stared at the phone. It began ringing again. Her name appeared on the screen. Lin Yue. The woman I once loved enough to destroy myself for. My thumb hovered above the answer button. Memories flooded back. Every sacrifice. Every compromise. Every time I convinced myself things would improve. I answered. Hello. Where are you? No greeting. No concern. Just irritation. Exactly as I remembered. I'm at work. I know that. Her voice sharpened. Why aren't you answering my messages? I glanced at the conference room around me. People were still leaving. My project director stood nearby, speaking with clients. In my previous life, panic had immediately seized me. I had apologized within seconds. Not this time. I was in a meeting. So, the single word carried familiar disbelief. as though my explanation wasn't relevant, as though her feelings automatically outranked everything else. 5 years ago, I couldn't see it. Now I could, painfully clearly. So I couldn't answer. Silence. Then, you care more about work than me. There it was. The weapon she always used. Not discussion, not communication, accusation. A statement designed to force guilt, to force pursuit, to force surrender. The old me would already be apologizing. The new me simply asked, "Do you need something urgent?" Another pause. Longer this time. The script wasn't going according to plan. I wanted lunch. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I had died for this woman. I had literally died. And now, from the perspective of my second life, the absurdity was impossible to ignore. You can eat lunch. With you. I'm working. You're impossible. Click. The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly. My heartbeat remained calm. No panic. No desperation. No urge to call back. Just silence. A strange silence. One I had never allowed myself before. That evening, I drove through the city with the windows slightly open. Warm spring air drifted into the car. Everything looked familiar. The streets. The buildings. The advertisements. 5 years earlier. The world itself seemed younger. Yet I felt older than ever. At a red light, I checked my messages. 23 unread texts from UA. In my previous life, every one of them would have dictated my mood. Now I read them with detached curiosity. Why are you acting strange? Are you still angry? Answer me. Fine. Ignore me. I guess work is more important. The pattern was so obvious now. Guilt. Pressure. Escalation. Then emotional punishment. Not because she hated me. Because she expected me. Expected me to chase. Expected me to fix. Expected me to surrender. The realization hurt more than I expected. Because it forced me to confront an ugly truth. UA wasn't the only person responsible. I had helped create this dynamic. Every time I abandoned my priorities. Every time I rewarded unreasonable behavior. Every time I rushed to repair conflict she started. I taught her that my boundaries didn't matter. I taught her that my needs came second. I taught her that no matter what happened, I would come running. The light turned green. I drove forward slowly, lost in thought. When I arrived home, another memory hit me. This apartment. I knew exactly what would happen tonight. In my first life, UA would arrive unannounced, demand an apology, start an argument, then leave dramatically, and I would chase her. I remembered every detail. The words, the anger, the humiliation, the pattern, a test. Perhaps that was what this second life truly was. Not a chance to change her, a chance to change myself. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Exactly on schedule. I opened the door. Lin Yue stood outside. 24 years old. Beautiful. Confident. Familiar. For a brief moment, memories threatened to overwhelm me. The good memories. The happy ones. The reasons I had stayed. Then I remembered the engagement banquet. The microphone. The applause. The broken ring box. The unread messages beside my dying body. The warmth vanished. What? She asked immediately. I blinked. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Because I finally see you. The thought remained unspoken. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. She entered, crossed her arms, and waited. I knew this scene perfectly. She expected me to apologize first, to break the silence, to repair the tension. Minutes passed. Neither of us spoke. Her confidence began to crack. Well, I sat down. Well, what? The irritation in her eyes deepened. You're seriously not going to apologize? There it was. Direct. Simple. Expected. I looked at her quietly. For what? The question landed like a stone. Her expression froze. Because for years I had never asked it. I simply accepted blame. Regardless of facts. Regardless of fairness. Regardless of reality. Now she actually had to answer. You ignored me. I was working. You could have replied. I was in a meeting. You always have excuses. No. I shook my head calmly. I have reasons. The room became silent. The difference between those two words seemed small. Yet everything changed. Excuses seek forgiveness. Reasons establish reality. For the first time, I wasn't asking for permission to exist. I wasn't defending myself. I was simply stating facts. Yue stared at me, confused, almost unsettled, as though she had suddenly encountered a stranger wearing my face. Finally, she stood. Fine. I nodded. Okay. Her eyes widened slightly. She had expected resistance, expected pursuit, expected negotiation. Instead, she received acceptance. The one response she wasn't prepared for. She grabbed her purse, walked toward the door, then stopped, waiting. A final opportunity, a final invitation for me to chase, to stop her, to apologize, to restore the old balance. I remained seated. The seconds stretched. Her expression slowly changed, from anger to confusion to something dangerously close to panic. Then she left. The door closed. The apartment became quiet. I sat alone in the silence. And, for the first time in 2 lives, I understood something. The people who fear silence most are often the people who relied on others to fill it. My phone vibrated. A message from UA appeared almost immediately. Why didn't you stop me? I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked the phone without replying. Outside, night settled over the city. Inside, something old finally began to die. Not my love. Not yet. Those wounds would take longer. What died was something more dangerous. The belief that keeping someone required losing myself. I walked to the window, looked out over the lights, and made the first real decision of my second life. Not revenge, not retaliation, not punishment, simply refusal. I would no longer chase every argument. I would no longer rescue every emotional crisis. I would no longer sacrifice myself to maintain a relationship another person refused to nurture. Because I finally understood a truth my first life had taught me with unbearable cruelty. The people who expect endless sacrifice are often the ones who value it least. I closed my eyes. A long breath escaped my chest. Then I whispered the promise that would define my second life. This time, I won't do it again. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. Not from anxiety, not from anticipation, from habit. For years, my mornings had begun with emotional maintenance. Checking messages, measuring moods, preparing responses, trying to predict what version of Lin Yue I would encounter that day. Would she be affectionate, distant, upset, disappointed, angry? My emotional state often depended on the answer. That realization disgusted me now. Not because of her, because of me, because I had surrendered that power willingly. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The apartment was quiet. No notifications, no emergencies, no crises. Yet a strange tension lingered beneath my skin. A feeling I eventually recognized. Withdrawal. Not from love. From responsibility. For years, I had trained myself to respond instantly whenever Yue was unhappy. Now, every minute of silence felt unnatural. Like an addict refusing a familiar poison. My phone vibrated. My gaze shifted toward the nightstand. Yue. Of course. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A moment later, another message appeared. Call me. I put the phone down. 5 minutes later, another arrived. We need to talk. Then another. Are you seriously still angry? I almost smiled. Interesting. In my first life, after arguments, I was always the first person to break silence. Always. Without exception. Now the pattern had reversed. And she didn't know how to handle it. Neither did I. At work, I buried myself in project documents. The conference room buzzed with activity. Developers discussed deadlines. Managers reviewed budgets. Clients sent revisions. Life moved forward. And for the first time in years, I actually noticed how much of my attention had previously been consumed by relationship drama. My phone remained face down. At noon, Wang Jun sat across from me in the cafeteria. He studied me while stirring his soup. You look different. I glanced up. Different. Relaxed. I laughed. That's a strange word. It's accurate. He shrugged. Usually you're checking your phone every 30 seconds. The observation hit harder than expected. Because it was true. Embarrassingly true. Maybe I'm trying something new. Like what? I considered the question, then answered honestly. Minding my own business. Wang Jun laughed. Good luck with that. I smiled faintly. If only he knew. At 1:30, my phone rang again. Yue. This time I answered. Not because I felt obligated. Because I was curious. What is it? Silence greeted me. Then, what is that supposed to mean? I leaned back in my chair. What? What is it? Her irritation was immediate. You sound like I'm bothering you. I rubbed my forehead. In my first life, this conversation would already be spiraling into an argument. Now I could see the structure clearly. The conversation wasn't about communication. It was about reassurance. validation, proof. She wanted confirmation that she still occupied the center of my attention. And for years, I had supplied that confirmation endlessly. What do you need, Yue? Another pause. Then, my car won't start. I closed my eyes. A memory surfaced immediately. The first life. I left work early, driven across the city, missed an important client presentation, spent 4 hours helping her, only to discover the battery wasn't dead. She simply hadn't turned the key fully. By the end of the day, she had forgotten my sacrifice entirely. I remembered every detail. Did you call roadside assistance? No. What? A beat of silence. Then, because you can come. The certainty in her voice was almost fascinating. Not cruel, not malicious, just unquestioned, as though my availability was a natural law. Like gravity, like weather, like sunrise. I looked around the office. My team was preparing for an afternoon review, a review that would influence next quarter's contracts. 5 years ago, I abandoned it. This time, no. The word emerged calmly, firmly, without anger, without explanation. Just no. The silence that followed felt physical, heavy. What? I can't leave work. You always leave work. The moment she said it, both of us became quiet, because she'd accidentally revealed the truth. Not a request, an expectation, not appreciation, reliance, a system, one I had built myself. Not today. Her voice sharpened. So you're just abandoning me? I stared at the office window. People walked below. Cars moved through intersections. Life continued. I gave you a solution. Roadside assistance isn't the point. There it was again. The point wasn't solving the problem. The point was me. My effort. My sacrifice. My proof. I took a slow breath, then said, I hope your car gets fixed. And ended the call. For several minutes I simply sat there. My heart pounded harder than expected. Not because of guilt. Because of fear. The old fear. The fear that refusing would destroy everything. The fear that boundaries would cost me love. The fear that saying no would make me unworthy. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I understood that now. People often imagine change as a single decision. It isn't. It's hundreds of decisions, made repeatedly, against old instincts, against old habits, against old fears. My phone exploded with messages. Unbelievable. You've changed. I don't even recognize you anymore. Fine. Forget it. I read each one, then locked the screen. No response. No defense. No argument. The silence felt unbearable and strangely liberating. That evening, I visited my parents. A decision I hadn't made often enough in my first life. The familiar apartment building stood exactly where memory placed it. The same faded paint. The same old elevator. The same warm light beneath their front door. When my mother opened it, her face immediately softened. Chun. Something tightened in my chest. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed this. Not because years had passed. Because in my first life, I had spent years emotionally absent. Present physically. Elsewhere mentally. Always distracted. Always managing another crisis. My father emerged from the kitchen, carrying tea. You look better. I laughed. Apparently everyone thinks that. He snorted. That's because everyone has eyes. We sat together for dinner. Simple food. Ordinary conversation. Nothing dramatic. Nothing urgent. Nothing emotionally exhausting. And yet it felt more peaceful than most of my relationship memories. Halfway through the meal, my mother asked carefully, How is Yue? The old me would have defended her immediately. Explained. Justified. Protected. Instead I thought carefully. Then answered. I don't know. Both parents looked surprised. So you're fighting? My father asked. No. The answer felt strange. We're experiencing consequences. My father raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? I smiled faintly. It means I'm no longer fixing problems by myself. Silence settled across the table. Then my father nodded slowly, as though he understood far more than he said. When I returned home, a surprise awaited me. Yue was sitting outside my apartment door. Her expression immediately darkened when she saw me. There you are. I stopped. A younger version of myself would have panicked instantly. Now I simply walked closer. What happened? What happened? She stood abruptly. I've been waiting for an hour. I unlocked the door. What? Her jaw tightened. Because you weren't answering. I opened the apartment. Entered. Left the door open. An invitation. She followed, immediately launching into frustration. My car was stranded. It got fixed. That's not the point. I almost laughed. That phrase again. Everything always came back to the same thing. Not outcomes. Not solutions. Validation. Proof. Sacrifice. You know, she continued, normal couples help each other. I looked at her quietly. The statement lingered in the air. Then I asked, how many times have you left work to help me? Silence. The room became still. Her expression froze. Because neither of us could remember a single occasion. Not one. I wasn't asking to score points. I genuinely wanted an answer. She had none. That's different. Of course it was. The universal phrase used whenever fairness becomes inconvenient. I sat down. Exhaustion creeping into my bones. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind accumulated over years. Yue stared at me. For the first time since arriving, uncertainty appeared in her eyes. You've been acting strange. Maybe. Or maybe I had simply stopped acting normal. Normal had nearly killed me. Several minutes passed. Then something unexpected happened. Her anger softened. Only slightly. Enough to reveal something underneath. Fear. A fleeting glimpse. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. You didn't even ask if I got home safely. The accusation sounded weaker now. Less certain. Almost vulnerable. I considered my answer. Then gave the truth. I knew you'd find a way home. What if I didn't? You would. How can you be so sure? I met her gaze. Because for years I had been the one convincing her she couldn't solve problems without me. An uncomfortable realization settled inside me. I had not only enabled dependency, I had encouraged it. Every rescue teaches a lesson. Every intervention creates expectations. Every sacrifice establishes a precedent. And suddenly a thought surfaced with startling clarity. Every act of rescue teaches someone they never need to save themselves. The truth hit me harder than any argument ever had. Because it implicated me. Not as a victim. As a participant. Yue stared at me. Waiting. Expecting another explanation. Another debate. Another chase. Instead I simply said, you got home, didn't you? She had no answer. The silence stretched. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Long enough to become revealing. Eventually she stood. This time more slowly. Less dramatically. As though uncertain what outcome she wanted. At the door, she hesitated. Then asked quietly, are you giving up on us? The question caught me off guard. Because beneath the frustration, beneath the entitlement, beneath the expectations, I heard genuine fear. For a moment, I remembered why I had loved her. Not because she was perfect. Because she was human. Flawed. Complicated. Afraid. Just like me. But understanding someone and sacrificing yourself for them were not the same thing. I don't know. I answered honestly. The words seemed to wound her more than anger would have. Because uncertainty couldn't be argued with. Couldn't be manipulated. Couldn't be negotiated. It simply existed. She left shortly afterward. The apartment fell silent once more. I thought the confrontation was over. I was wrong. Because 30 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't expected. Su Lian, Yue's best friend. The same woman who, in my first life, had sent me that message before my death. Stop bothering her. She needs space. A cold feeling crept down my spine. I answered. Hello. Her voice came immediately. Sharp. Accusatory. Protective. Chen, what exactly are you doing to Yue? I frowned. What do you mean? She's crying. The words hung in the air. Then Su Yin delivered something that made my blood run cold. Something I had never known in my first life. Something that would change everything. Do you have any idea how much pressure her family has been putting on her about the engagement? I sat upright. What pressure? Silence. Su Yin realized she'd said too much. Then the line went dead. I stared at the screen. Heart pounding. Because in both lives, no one had ever mentioned pressure from Yue's family. No one. And suddenly I understood one thing with absolute certainty. There was a piece of the story I had never been allowed to see. And for the first time, I intended to find it. Every act of rescue teaches someone they never need to save themselves. The call ended. But Su Yin's words remained. Like a crack spreading through glass. Pressure from her family. I sat motionless on the couch, staring at the dark screen of my phone. In both lives, I had spent years believing I understood my relationship. Believing I understood every argument, every withdrawal, every emotional explosion, every cold shoulder. But what if I didn't? What if there had always been another layer? The thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit, because Rebirth had given me confidence, a dangerous confidence, the confidence of hindsight, the confidence of believing I already knew how events would unfold. But now a simple sentence had reminded me of something important. I knew outcomes, not necessarily causes, and those were very different things. Outside the apartment window, city lights flickered beneath the night sky. Inside, I felt the old urge rising again. The urge to investigate immediately, to call someone, to push, to demand answers, to force movement. Then I stopped myself. My entire first life had been built around immediate reactions, immediate fixes, immediate interventions. What had that accomplished? Nothing worth repeating. So instead, I did something unfamiliar. Nothing. I put my phone aside, made tea, sat by the window, and waited. The next morning, consequences arrived sooner than expected. Not for me, for Yue. At work, I was reviewing project timelines when my phone buzzed. A message, not from Yue, from a mutual acquaintance. Lu Chung, did something happen between you and Yue? I frowned. Why? The response came immediately. She canceled dinner with everyone last night. Interesting. In my first life, when Yue was upset, she often withdrew. Not from me, from everyone. I used to view that as evidence of how deeply she felt things. Now I wondered if it was something else. An expectation, an unconscious belief that eventually someone would come after her. Usually me, but I hadn't, and apparently nobody else had either. A second message arrived. She's been in a terrible mood. I thanked him and put the phone away, then returned to work. No analysis, no intervention, no rescue, just work. Yet despite my efforts, a small voice whispered inside my mind. What if she's genuinely struggling? I closed my eyes briefly. That voice sounded noble, compassionate, reasonable, but I recognized it, because in my first life, that voice had justified almost every sacrifice. Concern can become a trap when it only moves in one direction. I returned to my documents. At noon, something unexpected happened. My department director called me into his office. In my first life, this meeting had been a disaster. I remembered it clearly. Back then, I had missed deadlines because of relationship drama, arrived distracted, performed poorly, lost credibility. This time was different. Director Huang studied several reports before looking up. His expression surprised me. Approval. Good work. I blinked. The words felt strangely unfamiliar. Thank you. He nodded. The client specifically mentioned your proposal. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Not because praise was unusual, because I had forgotten what it felt like. In my first life, so much emotional energy had been consumed elsewhere that professional victories often felt secondary, meaningless, temporary. Now they felt different, real, earned, important. Director Huang leaned back. I've been considering candidates for the regional project. My attention sharpened. The regional project, a major opportunity, one I had lost in my first life. Not because of incompetence, because I wasn't dependable, because relationship emergencies repeatedly interfered with work. I'd like you involved. For several seconds, I simply stared. A memory surfaced. 5 years later, the same project becoming the foundation of someone else's promotion, someone else's success. Not mine. A future that suddenly no longer seemed fixed. I left the office feeling strangely disoriented. Not because something dramatic had happened, because something simple had. A door had opened, one that had always existed, one I never noticed because I was too busy running after another. That evening, Yue finally appeared. Not at my apartment, at my office. The receptionist called ahead. There is someone here to see you. When I entered the lobby, I immediately spotted her. She sat near the window, arms crossed, expression tense, waiting. Several co-workers noticed her. A few exchanged knowing looks. In my first life, scenes like this made me nervous. Now they made me tired. I walked over calmly. Why are you here? No greeting. No smile. Just directness. Her eyes narrowed. You couldn't answer your phone? I was working. Theirs again. I said nothing. The silence irritated her immediately. For years, she had relied on conversations becoming emotional, escalating, turning chaotic. Silence prevented that. It forced people to confront their own thoughts. And many hated it, including me. At least before. Yue stood. We need to talk. We're talking. No. Frustration flashed across her face. An actual conversation. I almost smiled. What she meant was familiar. An emotional negotiation. A discussion where I explained myself until she felt reassured. I had participated in hundreds, maybe thousands, and not one had solved the underlying problem. Okay. Her expression brightened slightly. Then I added, say what you want to say. The brightness disappeared. Because once again, I wasn't chasing the conversation forward. I wasn't carrying its weight. She had to. Several awkward seconds passed. Finally she spoke. People are asking questions. About what? About us. I nodded. Reasonable. Expected. Then she waited, apparently expecting me to continue. When I didn't, she frowned. Aren't you worried? Should I be? The question genuinely surprised her. I could see it. Not because it was clever, because it was unfamiliar. For years my emotional world revolved around her reactions. Now it didn't, and neither of us fully understood what that meant. You're making me look bad. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The moment they did, both of us froze. Because they revealed more than intended. I looked at her carefully. You think that's what this is about? Her gaze shifted away, not answering, which was answer enough. A memory surfaced. The engagement banquet. The microphone. The applause. The humiliation. In my first life, I never truly examined that moment. I only experienced the pain. Now I saw something else. Fear. Image. Reputation. Expectation. How much of our relationship had been shaped by appearances? How much had been driven by what other people thought? The questions lingered. Uncomfortable. Unanswered. Yue sighed. For the first time since arriving, she looked exhausted. Not angry. Exhausted. And strangely, older. As though carrying something heavy. I remembered Su Lian's words. Pressure. Family pressure. The temptation to ask surfaced immediately. But I resisted. Because suddenly I understood something. If I wanted the truth, chasing it wasn't necessarily the best path. People reveal more when they aren't being pursued. So instead I asked, how are your parents? Her head snapped up. The reaction was immediate. Almost offensive. What? Interesting. Very interesting. No reason. She stared at me. Searching. Suspicious. Then looked away. And in that brief moment I knew. The issue was real. Whatever was happening involved her family. Deeply. That night, after she left, I received another surprise. My phone rang. Director Huang. At nearly 10 o'clock. I answered immediately. Director? Sorry for calling late. His voice sounded unusually serious. Do you have a minute? Something in his tone made me sit upright. Of course. Several seconds passed. Then he asked, have you ever heard the name Lin Zhenghua? The name struck me like lightning. Yue's father. A businessman. Influential. Demanding. A man I'd spent years trying to impress. Why would Director Huang know him? My pulse quickened. Yes. Another pause. Then, I had a meeting with him today. The room seemed to grow quieter. I stood, walked toward the window, listening carefully. Director Huang continued. He mentioned you. Every muscle in my body tightened. Mentioned me? Why? How? In my first life, no such conversation ever occurred. Or if it had, I never learned about it. What did he say? Silence. Long enough to become unsettling. Then Director Huang answered carefully. As your supervisor, I wasn't sure whether I should tell you. Cold unease crept through my chest. Tell me what? His next sentence changed everything. He asked whether promoting you would create complications for his daughter's future. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. The city lights outside blurred. Not because of tears. Because my mind was racing. Promoting me? Complications? His daughter's future? The implications were endless. And disturbing. Director Huang continued quietly. I thought you should know. The call ended soon afterward. But I remained standing by the window. Motionless. Trying to process what I'd heard. Because suddenly pieces were moving. Pieces I hadn't even known existed. Yue's father's pressure. His involvement. His interest in my career. His concern about promotions. Questions multiplied rapidly. Had he interfered before? Had opportunities disappeared because of him? Had my future been influenced in ways I never realized? The possibility made my stomach turn. Because if true, then the story of my first life wasn't what I believed. Not even close. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the glass, a truth was beginning to emerge. A truth hidden for years. A truth I had never been meant to discover. As I stared into the night, one realization settled heavily inside me. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing, because doing nothing allows reality to move without your interference, allows secrets to surface, allows masks to slip, allows consequences to unfold. And for the first time in 2 lives, I had stepped aside, only to discover that an entire hidden world had been moving behind my back. Then my phone buzzed once more. A message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. No introduction. No explanation. No signature. Only this. If you want to know what really happened between Yue and her family, stop asking her and start looking at the company her father doesn't want anyone discussing. I stared at the message, heart pounding, because I already knew one thing. There was only one company Lin Zhonghua never mentioned in public. One company that had disappeared from conversations years ago. One company tied to a scandal I barely remembered. And suddenly I understood. The truth wasn't hiding inside my relationship. The truth was hiding somewhere much bigger, much older, and someone had just pointed me toward it. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. For a long time, I stared at the anonymous message. The screen eventually dimmed, then went dark. Yet the words remained burned into my thoughts. The company her father doesn't want anyone discussing. The name surfaced almost immediately. Jinhai Materials, a company I vaguely remembered from my first life. Not because it was successful, because it vanished. Years ago, I had heard fragments of conversations about it. A supplier, a failed acquisition, some kind of internal dispute. Whenever the subject appeared, people seemed strangely eager to move on, including Lin Zhonghua. Especially Lin Zhonghua. At the time, I never cared enough to ask questions. Why would I? My entire life revolved around preserving my relationship with his daughter. Career opportunities, business politics, family secrets. All of it seemed secondary. Now things look different. Painfully different. Because the more I stepped back from Yue's world, the more hidden machinery I began to notice. Machinery that had always been operating behind the scenes. The following morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was nearly empty. Only a handful of employees had arrived. Perfect. I sat at my desk, opened company databases, then started searching. Jinhai Materials. The results were sparse. Suspiciously sparse. Several records existed, but entire sections appeared missing. Archived. Restricted. Removed. The pattern itself felt significant. People rarely hide things that don't matter. I continued digging. Financial reports, corporate registrations, historical partnerships, board memberships. The deeper I looked, the stranger everything became, because one name kept appearing. Not publicly, not prominently, but repeatedly. Lin Zhonghua, not as owner, not as executive, as something far more difficult to trace. A silent investor. My pulse quickened. Years ago, Jinhai Materials suffered a catastrophic collapse. Debt, lawsuits, regulatory investigations. The company imploded. Hundreds lost money. Employees lost jobs. Executives disappeared. And somehow Lin Zhonghua emerged untouched. The more I read, the less accidental it looked. A chill ran through me, because I suddenly remembered something from my first life. A conversation. A brief one. Yue arguing with her father over dinner. I couldn't remember details. Only fragments. At the time I dismissed it. Now those fragments returned. You can't keep pretending it never happened. Some mistakes don't need revisiting. People suffered. Enough. At the time, none of it made sense. Now it did. At least partially. Working early, the voice startled me. I quickly minimized several windows. Director Huang stood nearby holding coffee. His gaze lingered on my monitor. Not suspicious. Curious. You've become very motivated lately. I smiled faintly, trying to improve. He nodded approvingly, then paused. Be careful. The words seemed casual, yet something in his expression suggested otherwise. What do you mean? Director Huang studied me, then sighed. There are people who dislike curiosity. The sentence landed heavily, because it wasn't random. He knew something. Not everything, but something. Unfortunately, before I could ask more, another manager entered. The moment vanished, leaving questions behind. That afternoon, Yue called. 3 times. I didn't answer, not out of spite. I was busy, a reality that once would have been impossible. The 4th call came during lunch. I finally answered. Hello. Her response arrived immediately. Why aren't you picking up? No greeting. No concern. The familiar pattern returned. Only now it seemed increasingly transparent. I've been working. You've been working for 3 days. I almost laughed. That's generally how jobs work. Silence. Then frustration. You're doing this on purpose. No. I leaned back in my chair. I'm living my life. The sentence struck harder than intended. Because the line became completely silent. Several seconds passed. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded different. Quieter. Wasn't I part of your life? The question surprised me. Not because of the words. Because of the vulnerability behind them. For a brief moment, I saw the situation through her eyes. For years, my attention had been constant. Predictable. Reliable. Then suddenly it wasn't. The ground beneath her had shifted, just as it once shifted beneath me. The difference was simple. I spent years adapting. She had only experienced it for days. I don't know anymore. The truth escaped before I could soften it. And the silence that followed hurt both of us. Eventually she ended the call. No argument. No accusation. No dramatic exit. Just silence. Strangely, that worried me more. That evening, another piece of the puzzle arrived. Unexpectedly. Through my father. I was visiting my parents when he placed an old newspaper clipping on the table. I stared at it. Confused. What is this? My father adjusted his glasses. I heard you asking questions about gene high materials. I looked up sharply. Ow. A small smile appeared. Your mother still talks. I rubbed my forehead. Of course. He pushed the clipping toward me. Read it. I did. Within seconds, my pulse accelerated. The article described the final days before gene high materials collapsed. Investors lost everything. Employees protested. Several executives faced investigation. Yet one section immediately caught my attention. A whistleblower. An anonymous internal accountant. The person had attempted to expose financial irregularities months before the collapse. The report vanished. The investigation stalled. Nothing happened. Then the company exploded. I read the paragraph twice. Then, 3 times. A name appeared near the bottom. Tiny. Easy to miss. But unmistakable. Linyu. I frowned. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. Then memory struck. Yue's older sister. The sister nobody mentioned. The sister who supposedly moved overseas years ago. The sister who vanished from family conversations entirely. My heartbeat quickened. I looked up. Where did you get this? My father's expression grew serious. I kept it. Why? His answer chilled me. Because I always thought someone worked very hard to make people forget. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces refused to fit neatly together. Yue. Her father. Gene materials. The whistleblower. The missing sister. The family pressure. None of it felt unrelated anymore. Not after everything I'd discovered. Near midnight, my phone vibrated. A message. Not from Yue. From an unknown number. Again. This time there was an attachment. A photograph. I opened it. Then froze. The image showed 3 people. Lin Zhenghua. A younger Yue. And a woman standing beside them. A woman who looked remarkably similar to Yue. Linyu. The older sister. Across the photograph, someone had written a single sentence. Ask why she disappeared. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly I wasn't investigating a company anymore. I was investigating a family. And families often hide uglier secrets than businesses. The next day delivered the first major crack. A public one. Completely unexpected. Around noon, chaos erupted online. News articles. Financial forums. Industry chat groups. Everywhere. The same topic. The same headline. A former executive from Gene High Materials had come forward. After years of silence. And he was naming names. I opened the article immediately. My eyes scanned rapidly. Then stopped. Because one of the individuals mentioned was Lin Zhenghua. For several seconds I simply stared. The accusation wasn't criminal. Not yet. But devastating. The executive claimed influential investors had known about financial manipulation months before collapse. Known. And remained silent. The implications were enormous. Comments exploded. Questions multiplied. Media outlets began investigating. And for the first time in years, public attention focused directly on Lin Zhenghua. I remembered his obsession with image. With reputation. With control. This wasn't merely bad news. This was disaster. My phone rang. Yue. I answered. Immediately. Her breathing sounded uneven. Chun. The moment I heard her voice, I knew. She had seen the news. Everyone had. What happened? A bitter laugh escaped her. You should ask what happened years ago. I remained silent, listening, waiting. For once, not forcing the conversation, not rescuing it, not guiding it, just listening. And eventually, she spoke. My sister tried to expose them. The words landed like thunder. I closed my eyes. Pieces clicked together, one after another. They destroyed her for it. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Yue whispered something that changed everything. Something that explained years of tension, years of fear, years of family pressure, years of emotional conflict. My father told me that if I ever made trouble the way she did, I'd lose everything too. I said nothing. Couldn't. Because suddenly the woman I'd spent years blaming looked different. Not innocent, not blameless, but trapped. Trapped inside a family system built on fear. And fear changes people. Sometimes into victims. Sometimes into accomplices. Often both. When the call ended, I remained seated for a long time, staring at nothing, thinking, understanding, not forgiving, understanding. There was a difference, a crucial difference. 3 days later, the next explosion arrived. Bigger, public, unavoidable. Internal financial documents leaked online. Authentic, verifiable, damaging. News outlets seized them immediately. Regulators announced reviews. Investors demanded explanations. Former employees came forward. And across every article, every discussion, every investigation, one truth became increasingly clear. The collapse of Jinhai Materials had never been an accident. It had been concealed for years. Now the concealment itself was becoming the scandal. And as the story spread, so did one name. Lin Zhenghua, the man who spent decades protecting his image. The man who controlled everyone around him through pressure and fear. The man who thought silence could bury truth forever. Now stood at the center of storm. Publicly, visibly, humiliatingly. And I had done almost nothing. That realization stayed with me. Because this wasn't revenge. I hadn't exposed him, hadn't attacked him, hadn't hunted him. I simply stepped aside. And once enough people stopped protecting lies, the lies collapsed under their own weight. Just like the people who built them. As I watched another breaking news report appear on my screen, one thought echoed quietly through my mind. Truth does not create damage. It reveals where damage already exists. And somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the investigations, beyond the public humiliation, I knew something with certainty. Lin Zhenghua's downfall was no longer a possibility. It was only a matter of time. Truth does not create damage. It reveals where damage already exists. The first time I saw Lin Zhenghua after the scandal broke, he looked 10 years older. Not in person. On television. A short video clip from a financial news outlet. 37 seconds long. That was all. 37 seconds was enough to erase decades of carefully maintained authority. Reporters surrounded him outside a conference center. Questions came from every direction. Did you know about the financial discrepancies? Did you pressure investors to remain silent? What was your relationship with Jinhai Materials? His usual confidence was gone. The measured smile, the controlled tone, the commanding presence, all missing. In their place stood a tired man, trying desperately to escape questions. A man discovering that influence has limits. A man learning that silence eventually accumulates interest. I watched the clip once, then closed it. Not because I felt satisfaction, because I didn't. What I felt was stranger. Distance. The entire situation no longer revolved around me. For most of my first life, everything connected back to my relationship with Yue. Her moods, her expectations, her family, her approval. Now, those connections were weakening. And as they weakened, something unexpected happened. My own life began expanding. A week later, Director Huang officially offered me the regional project. The same opportunity one lost in my first life. The same opportunity that once disappeared while I was busy putting out emotional fires. This time I sat in his office listening carefully. No distractions. No vibrating phone. No anxious thoughts about arguments waiting outside the room. Just the conversation. Just the opportunity. Just me. I won't pretend it's easy, Director Huang said. The workload will increase significantly. I nodded. I'm aware. The responsibility is substantial. I understand. He studied me for several seconds, then smiled. You seem different lately. I laughed softly. I hear that often. This time it's true. His expression turned thoughtful. You used to look like someone carrying another person's luggage. The observation caught me off guard, because it was painfully accurate. For years, I had carried responsibilities that weren't mine. Emotional burdens, family conflicts, unspoken expectations, other people's consequences, all while neglecting my own future. Director Huang extended his hand. Congratulations. I shook it, and for the first time in 2 lives, the achievement felt entirely mine. The project changed everything. Not overnight, not dramatically, gradually, which made it more meaningful. I began traveling across different cities, meeting clients, building relationships, solving actual problems. The work was difficult, demanding, sometimes exhausting, but unlike my old relationship patterns, effort here produced results. Direct results, visible results. If I prepared thoroughly, meetings improved. If I worked carefully, projects succeeded. If I made mistakes, I learned. The rules were clear, fair, predictable. Life rarely felt that way before. One evening after a successful presentation, I sat alone in a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. The city lights reflected across dark water. A cool breeze drifted through open windows. For once, I wasn't rushing somewhere. Wasn't fixing something. Wasn't apologizing. I was simply existing. The realization felt almost surreal. My phone vibrated. A message from my mother. Have you eaten? I smiled, then replied, yes. 3 seconds later, actual food or coffee? I laughed out loud. Several nearby diners glanced over. I didn't care. That simple exchange warmed me more than I expected. Because support doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives through ordinary concern, ordinary consistency, ordinary presence. Things I once overlooked. A month later, I met someone who would unexpectedly become important. Not romantically, not dramatically, professionally. His name was Gu Wei, an older consultant assigned to assist our regional expansion. The type of person who seemed unimpressive initially, then surprised everyone. He rarely spoke during meetings. Yet whenever he did, people listened. Not because he demanded attention, because he earned it. One evening after work, we shared dinner. Halfway through the meal, he asked, "Can I tell you something?" Of course. He set down his tea. "You spent a lot of time observing people." I smiled. "Occupational habit." "No." He shook his head. "Survival habit." The distinction startled me. Gu Wei continued. "People who grow up around instability learn to monitor emotions constantly." I stared at him. The statement felt uncomfortably precise. He noticed, then nodded. "I know the look." "What look?" "The look of someone who spent years managing another person's reactions." For a moment, I wondered if he'd somehow read my history, my thoughts, my life. Obviously impossible. Yet his insight felt unnerving. "How can you tell?" A faint smile appeared. "Because I used to do the same thing." The conversation lasted hours. Long after dinner ended. Long after the restaurant emptied. We discussed work, family, boundaries, responsibility, choice. And one sentence remained with me afterward. A sentence so simple that I almost missed its significance. "You are allowed to let adults experience the consequences of their own decisions." I repeated it several times during the drive home. Allowed. Such a strange word. As though permission was necessary. Perhaps for people like me, it was. Meanwhile, the situation surrounding Lin Zhonghua continued deteriorating. Investigations expanded. More witnesses emerged. More documents surfaced. More questions appeared. The media coverage became relentless. His business partners began distancing themselves. Investors withdrew. Former allies grew silent. Years of accumulated influence slowly unraveled. Not because someone attacked him, because reality finally caught up. I occasionally received updates from UA. Never directly about the investigations. Mostly short messages. Simple observations. Fragments. "My father hasn't left the house all week." Or, "The lawyers are everywhere." Or, "My mother keeps pretending nothing is happening." I rarely responded with more than a few words. Not from cruelty. From caution. Some wounds need space. Some truths need time. And some relationships cannot heal while old patterns remain active. I understood that now. Then came the message that changed everything. It arrived late at night. Unexpectedly. From Yue. Only 6 words. "Can we meet one last time?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I fear the conversation, because I knew what it represented. Closure, or something close to it. The next afternoon, we met at a small tea house overlooking a quiet lake. The location surprised me. Then I remembered. Years earlier, before our relationship became complicated, we came here often. Back when conversations felt easy. Back before everything became negotiation. Yue arrived first. I barely recognized her. Not physically, emotionally. The tension that usually surrounded her seemed diminished. Not gone, just quieter. She looked tired, honest, human, perhaps for the first time. After tea arrived, neither of us spoke immediately. The silence wasn't hostile, just heavy. Eventually she broke it. My father might face charges. I nodded slowly. I heard. A bitter smile crossed her face. Of course you did. Then she looked out toward the lake, watching sunlight move across the water. For several minutes, she remained silent. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. When we were together, I thought you would never leave. The confession surprised me. Not because it was shocking, because it was accurate. For years, leaving never felt possible. Not emotionally, not mentally, not practically. I waited. She continued. I got used to it. There it was. Perhaps the most honest sentence she had ever spoken to me. No excuses. No manipulation. No blame. Just truth. Simple and painful. I know. She looked down. Tears gathered slowly. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Real. I didn't realize what I was doing. Part of me wanted to challenge that. To argue. To list examples. To revisit old wounds. Instead, I remained quiet. Because she wasn't asking for absolution. She was acknowledging reality. And those were different things. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Longer than I expected. We spoke about everything. The engagement. Her family. Her sister. The pressure. The fear. The years of emotional dependency. The habits we created together. Neither of us emerged blameless. That was perhaps the most important realization. Relationships rarely collapse because one person destroys them. Usually both contribute. In different ways. At different times. Through different mistakes. When we finally stood to leave, Yue looked at me carefully. Then asked, "Do you hate me?" The question lingered between us. I considered it honestly. Then shook my head. No. And I meant it. Hatred requires attachment. Energy. Investment. I no longer possessed those things. What remained was something gentler. Sadness. Understanding. Distance. She nodded slowly, as though she'd expected the answer, yet still needed to hear it. Before leaving, she said one final thing. A sentence I would remember for years. You were always trying to save us. I smiled faintly. And you? She looked toward the lake. A long silence followed. Then, I was waiting for you to. The honesty hurt. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. That evening, I walked alone through the city. No destination. No urgency. Just movement. The air felt lighter somehow. The sky clearer. Or perhaps I was. For years I believed peace would come from winning. Winning arguments. Winning approval. Winning love. Winning understanding. I was wrong. Peace arrived the moment winning stopped mattering. The moment I stopped treating every conflict as something that needed resolution. The moment I stopped proving my worth through sacrifice. The moment I accepted that some people must walk their own path. Even if it leads away from me. Especially then. As city lights flickered overhead, one thought settled quietly inside my heart. A thought earned across 2 lives. Peace begins when winning stops mattering. And for the first time, I felt ready for whatever came next. Because closure was approaching. Not through revenge. Not through punishment. Through acceptance. And acceptance, I was beginning to learn, was far more powerful. Peace begins when winter arrived quietly. Not with storms. Not with dramatic change. Just a gradual cooling of the world. The trees outside my apartment shed their leaves. The mornings became sharper. The nights longer. And for the first time in 2 lives, I noticed those things. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things people miss when their minds are always occupied elsewhere. I used to believe peace would feel exciting. Triumphant. Victorious. Instead it felt strangely simple. Like finally putting down a weight so gradually carried that I no longer remembered lifting it. 3 months had passed since my meeting with Yue. 3 months since our final honest conversation. 3 months since I stopped trying to repair what could not be repaired. Life continued. The regional project exceeded expectations. New contracts arrived. My team expanded. Director Huang became less of a supervisor and more of a mentor. Even my relationship with my parents changed. Not because they changed, because I finally showed up. Really showed up. Phone calls became regular. Family dinners became normal. Conversations became deeper. For years, I treated my own life like a waiting room. A place to sit until someone else was happy. Now it felt like a home. One evening, Gue invited me to dinner. The restaurant overlooked the river. The same river where countless lights reflected across dark water. As we ate, he studied me carefully, then smiled. You stopped looking over your shoulder. I laughed. I didn't realize I was. You were. He poured tea into both cups. For a long time, I looked out the window, watching boats move through the darkness. I spent years expecting problems. Of course. He nodded. When people live inside emotional chaos long enough, calm feels suspicious. The observation struck me immediately, because it was true. During the first months after my rebirth, I constantly waited for disaster. Expected conflict, expected guilt, expected demands, expected another crisis. Then gradually, nothing happened. Life simply moved forward. Normal, steady, healthy. And somehow that had been harder to trust than dysfunction. Gue raised his cup. To progress. I raised mine. To peace. 2 weeks later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end introduced herself immediately. Mr. Zhao. Speaking. This is Attorney Sunday. My attention sharpened. I represent Lin Zheng. The name felt distant now. Almost unreal. Like something from another life. In many ways it was. Attorney Sun continued carefully. Mr. Lin wishes to speak with you. I remained silent. Listening. Waiting. He specifically requested a meeting. A year ago, that request would have made me anxious. 5 years ago, it would have terrified me. Now, I felt almost nothing. The realization surprised me. Because once upon a time, Lin Jing's opinion carried enormous weight. His approval, his disapproval, his expectations, all of them influenced my decisions. Not anymore. When I asked, the lawyer sounded relieved. As soon as convenient. The meeting took place 3 days later. A private room inside a quiet rehabilitation facility. Not prison. Not yet. But close enough to feel symbolic. The man sitting across from me looked nothing like the person I remembered. Gone was the commanding businessman. Gone was the intimidating father. Gone was the carefully constructed image. Time. Stress. Consequences. All had taken their share. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Lin Zheng sighed. A tired sound. The sound of someone carrying years of accumulated mistakes. You've changed. I almost smiled. Everyone seemed to say that. So have you. A brief laugh escaped him. There was no humor in it. No. He looked down at his hands. I think this is who I've always been. The honesty surprised me. Perhaps consequences had finally stripped away his ability to perform. Several minutes passed. Then he asked, do you know why I wanted to meet? I shook my head. I have some guesses. Another faint laugh. Fair. He looked toward the window. Snow drifted outside. Slow. Silent. Then he finally spoke. I spent my entire life controlling outcomes. His voice remained calm. Measured. I controlled employees. Investors. Partners. My family. He paused. My daughters. The room grew quieter. I convinced myself it was protection. I listened. Not because I owed him attention. Because understanding often reveals more than judgment. I thought fear would keep people safe. His gaze lowered. It only taught them fear. The words lingered. Heavy. Earned. Painfully true. For the first time, I understood something important. Control and care often wear similar masks. Until consequences expose the difference. Eventually he looked directly at me. I owe you an apology. The sentence felt almost surreal. This man had never apologized for anything. At least not sincerely. Now he continued. I interfered with your career. I already suspected. Hearing confirmation still hurt. There were opportunities. His voice remained steady. Promotions. Recommendations. Each word landed heavily. I discouraged them. I felt my jaw tighten. Not from anger. From certainty. A certainty finally becoming fact. What? The question escaped before I could stop it. He closed his eyes briefly. Then answered. Because successful men leave. Silence filled the room. I stared at him, trying to process the statement. He continued. My oldest daughter challenged me. A shadow crossed his face. I lost her. Linyu. The missing sister. The whistleblower. The daughter erased from family conversations. The daughter who refused obedience. His voice lowered. When Yue met you, I saw ambition. He laughed bitterly. Potential. The irony twisted painfully. So I limited it. The confession settled heavily between us. Not because it surprised me, because it explained so much. Years of invisible resistance. Missed opportunities. Subtle interference. All rooted in fear. Not strategy. Fear. Fear disguised as protection. Fear disguised as authority. Fear disguised as love. When the meeting finally ended, Lin Zhengwa stopped me before I reached the door. Chun. I turned. His eyes looked older than I remembered. Older than his years. The greatest mistake of my life wasn't losing money. His voice trembled slightly. It wasn't the investigations. He swallowed. It wasn't public humiliation. A long silence followed. Then, it was teaching the people I love that fear and love were the same thing. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I nodded. Not because I forgave everything. Because I understood. And sometimes understanding is enough. I left without another word. A week later, Yue called. The first time in months. I answered. Hello. Her voice sounded calm. Healthier. Different. My father told me about your meeting. I leaned back in my chair. He talks more these days. A quiet laugh escaped her. Funny how that works. We spoke for nearly an hour. Not about us. Not really. About life. Work. Her sister. The future. At one point she mentioned therapy. Another point she mentioned moving to another city. A fresh start. A chance to build something independent. Listening to her, I felt something unexpected. Pride. Not romantic love. Not longing. Just genuine hope. Because for the first time, she sounded like someone taking responsibility for her own life. Not waiting to be rescued. Not waiting to be saved. Simply moving forward. Before hanging up, she became quiet. Then asked, do you ever regret it? I knew what she meant. Everything. The relationship. The distance. The ending. The answer arrived immediately. No. She was silent. Then, neither do I. And somehow, that felt like closure. Spring arrived months later. The city bloomed. Trees regained color. Sidewalk cafes filled with people. Life continued doing what it always does. Moving forward. One ordinary Saturday morning, I visited my parents. My mother complained that I worked too much. My father pretended not to agree. Neither fooled anyone. After lunch, I walked through a nearby park alone. Children played near a fountain. Older couples sat beneath trees. The world felt remarkably ordinary and remarkably beautiful. I stopped near the water, watching sunlight dance across the surface. Then I thought about my first life. The endless arguments. The chasing. The apologies. The exhaustion. The belief that love required self-erasure. The belief that sacrifice guaranteed appreciation. The belief that saving others would eventually save me. Every one of those beliefs had led me toward ruin. My second life taught something different. Something simpler. Something harder. You cannot build peace by abandoning yourself. You cannot create healthy relationships through endless rescue. And you cannot change people by carrying responsibilities they refuse to carry themselves. The lesson had cost me one life. Perhaps two. But standing there beneath warm sunlight, I finally understood. The second chance was never about fixing Yue. It was never about exposing her father. It was never about revenge. It was never about changing them. It was about changing me. That evening, as sunset painted the horizon gold, I returned home. The apartment was quiet. Comfortably quiet. Not lonely. Not empty. Peaceful. I placed my keys on the table, opened the balcony door, and stood overlooking the city. 5 years earlier, I died believing I had lost everything. Now I understood the truth. I had only lost the version of myself that needed losing. The man who chased every argument. The man who confused sacrifice with love. The man who believed his value depended on being needed. He died on that road. And perhaps that was necessary. Because the man standing here now finally understood something worth carrying into any life. The second chance was never about changing them. It was about changing me. The city lights slowly appeared beneath the darkening sky, one by one, like distant stars. And for the first time in 2 lives, I simply watched them shine.